In our last video on SeLinux fundamentals, I'll show you a few more commands that you can use to help you administer your SeLinux environment. One of the main commands that you have available to you is semanage. Semanage allows you to do pretty much everything. Set booleans, set context, pretty much anything you want to. You can do it on a temporary basis like you've seen me do, and you can write to the policy with the semanage command too, and it can display a lot of information for us, so it's a fantastic command. Another one is the get sebool. If you want to see the booleans that are set on your system in SeLinux, that command is also very useful. And then there's the set sebool command, which will allow you to set the boolean parameters for a particular process, port, file, whatever it is you're trying to manipulate. And you can use this tool to also either set it temporarily or permanently in the file system and the policy. What I'll use to demonstrate this is the SSH process. Remember, everything is considered an object to SeLinux in the file system. So even things like ports and processes. So if I do a ps-ef with a capital Z, and I ask it to grep for SSHD, let me make this a little bit bigger because it'll probably just scroll right off my screen anyway. Press enter, we see the SeLinux context and label for the SSD process. Ignore the one down here. That is just the grep command. This is the one we're interested in up here. This is the actual SSH daemon that's running. And you can see it has an SeLinux label, and it has a type of SSHD_T. We can gather more information about that. I can look to see if, what port that particular process is listening on. If I type semanage, and I'll tab it, here are the different things we can use semanage to help us configure with SeLinux. And one of the things I can look at is information on ports. So I want to see what ports are associated with what services that SeLinux is administering. And we can just give it an semanage, oops, there it is right there, port list, and we'll grep just for SSH to keep it clean here. Well, actually we'll go through, we'll just do it once by itself and see what happens. So here are all the ports, and we can just use grep to pull that information out on the particular port we're looking for, and we're going to say, you know what, I just want to see that one that begins with SSH. Cleared it out, D. Nope, didn't find it. Didn't find it. Oh, not using grep. Got to put grep in there. All right. Put the D back in there. Okay. There we go. Tracked it down eventually. So, SeLinux currently says that SSH is configured to listen on port 22, which is the default port that SSH uses. Now, it's not uncommon to change the port that SSH is listening on for security reasons. And we can do that. Normally what we would do is just go into the SSHD_conf file, change the port, restart the service, and everything is good. And if we actually type system control status on SSHD, we see that it's running, and we see that it's listening on all IPv6 addresses, all IP4 addresses, and listening for port 22. Fantastic. And so that means, as root, I should be able to SSH into the local host. And I can. I'm not going to continue with it, but that would let me complete the SSH session. So I'll cancel out of that. And now let's go and do what we would normally do. So before SSH, or I should say SeLinux, was around and enforced on systems, you could easily just go into something like SSH and then SSHD_conf, and I could find a line that references the port that it's listening to was 22, and I can tell it to listen to a different port, 222, very common port to put SSH on to kind of help with the security issues. If port 22 is available, everybody's coming after port 22. If you put it on 222, you'll have less issues in your logs with people trying to get in. So let's save that, and all I would have to do normally is just restart the service itself, restart SSHD, and that would take care of the problem. And then I would be able to connect to that port. So let's just look at what the status is on that right now, because we know this is an enabled SeLinux enabled box. So let's see what happens here. We'll go to status, and we get an error message coming up that the service is not starting. Now, a lot of times, if you're lucky, you'll actually find information in here about why the service is not starting. But we can also use our SeAlert to help us with that. And SeAlert will give us this little bit of information about port 222. Let's go see what it looks like in var log. So we'll do a tail. And we'll say 20 lines because I'm sure it's more than 10. Var log messages. Okay, so we get the same kind of input or output we would have gotten from SeAlert. Now, I'm just going to let you know, you don't always find it this conveniently in the messages logs. So some of these other SeLinux utilities are really the way. If in doubt and you're not sure what's going on, check with like an SeAlert before you try to do anything. But both of these are pretty much giving us the same information. If we look in here at details, it's going to come back and it's going to tell us that 99.5% possibility, or confidence I should say, that this is your problem. If you want to run SSH on port 222, you have to change it in SeLinux policy, or at least a boolean for right now. But remember, if you only change that to command line, that doesn't change it permanently. That only changes it temporarily until the system's relabeled, and that's something you want to be aware of, definitely. We can verify that. One way to verify that is, why don't we just set SeLinux to passive mode, and we'll set it to 0, and then we'll do a get enforce on it, and we'll see it's in passive mode. Now I'll try to SSH in to localhost, and I get a connection. Well, I shouldn't get a connection refused. Oh, I got to restart the service again. Okay, so that's what it is. Let's go restart the service again, because it did fail. Now it has to start again. Restart. All right, let's go check status one more time, just to make sure it's back. And it is, and it's listening on 222. That's because SeLinux is now in passive mode. We're still going to get that information in the logs that SeLinux does not like this, but it will allow us to do it by setting in passive mode. And the only downside of this is I've set the whole system into passive mode, which may not be what you want. You can just set a domain to passive mode if you want to also. So we should now be able to SSH into the box. It's still saying refused. Oh, why is it being refused? It's being refused because I'm not putting in the right port. So let's go ahead and put in the port. I think it's a capital P, 222 localhost, because we've changed it now. Yep. Capital P is not working here. How about lowercase p? All right, so sure enough, now we're going to be able to SSH in on port 22. Everything is good. But once we re-enable, and I'll say no here, no. Once we re-enable SeLinux, that won't work. So let's do that. Set enforce equals 1. I'll restart the service again. It's going to fail. And then I'm going to try to SSH in on port 222, which just worked before. And we get a connection refusal. Actually, it was a capital P, wasn't it? So let's make that right. Okay, still service refused. And that is because it's not starting, because SeLinux is preventing it from starting. Control status SSHD. So it's preventing us from starting. So what we need to do is tell SeLinux that we'd like to actually have SSH listen on port 222. What we can do with that is we can set it a couple different ways if we want to, but the one way I will set it is with the SE or the SE manage command. So SE manage command, to set the port and make it permanent, we would type SE manage out, and then we would tell SE manage that we're looking for a port, and we can actually use tab completion to help us with this. So we can say port from here, and then we tell it we want to add information to the policy. We tell it it's a type that we want to change, and we tell it the port we want to change. Now we can discover the port, once again, if we do an SE manage port, because this is the hardest. The syntax, the actual SE Linux syntax is sometimes difficult to remember. So we can do this, and we can grep for SSH. Again, there's the port type. So now we can type manage port, add type, and this is the type of port that we want to add. Come here, you. Port type, we want to make it permanent. We'll put the P option in there to make it permanent, and then we tell it TCP 222. That will write to the SE Linux policy and let it know that we want to permanently change the port in the policy that SE Linux listens on. And after we do this, and you'll notice when we permanently change something, when we change something temporarily, it happens real fast. When you change something permanently in the policy, you'll notice it takes a little time because it's actually editing the policy right now. So we'll give that a second. All right, and we'll go up and we'll check for the port. And sure enough, now it's showing that it has available 2. It will listen on 22 if we wanted to, or it will listen on 222 if we'd like it to. Great. Let's go see how that worked out for us. We'll do a system control, and we'll tell it to restart SSH D. And then we'll ask it for a status. And sure enough, now everything's good. So what has happened is that SE Linux, the policy has been changed and now is allowing us to run the SSH daemon on port 222, and we should, I gotta put the P in there, and localhost. Lowercase p. I always get my uppercase, lowercase mixed up here, but that's okay. Sure enough, we're able to log in. We'll say yes, and we'll put in the password, and we're good to go. And if we do an nt stat here, nt lp, and we'll grep for 222, sure enough, that's exactly what we see. Once again, this is an overview, a fundamental overview of SE Linux. There's a lot more things that can go into actually correctly configuring an SE Linux environment. There's many times where things will not communicate off the bat, and you have to actually develop the SE module to get them to work. There are utilities that will help you to do that. There's a utility called Audit to Allow that will allow you to audit the process that's taking place and then build a module based on that process, or at least tell you what you may need to change. A little bit beyond the scope of us right now. But that's enough information. That'll make you dangerous with SE Linux. Hopefully you find it helpful, and thank you for watching. Take care now. Bye.